CHAPTER IV of Napoleon I, An Intimate Biography, by Walter Geer. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. 4. 1796. Joséphine. As commander of the Army of the Interior, Napoleon had become one of the dominant men of the state. He took up suitable quarters in the Rue des Capucines, surrounded himself with a brilliant staff, donned a handsome uniform, set up carriages and horses, and made his appearance in society. He did not affiliate with any clique or faction, but made friends in all parties. He thoroughly reorganized the Army of the Interior and the National Guard, and formed a guard for the Directory. At the same time he did not forget his family. Uncle Feche became his secretary. Joseph was promised a consulship, and Lucien a lucrative position. Louis was made a lieutenant, and Jérôme was placed at school in Paris. His mother was well provided for. He never could do too much for his family, who, almost without exception, repaid him with the basest ingratitude. During the month of October, 1795, a short time after the events of the 13 Vendémiaire, chance brought together General Bonaparte and Vicomtesse de Beauharnais. The story has been often told and as often denied, but it is too good not to be true. As Général en second of the Army of the Interior, Napoleon had ordered the disarmament of the Parisians. One morning a young boy presented himself at headquarters to ask permission to keep his father's sword. Bonaparte saw the lad, became interested in him, and granted his request. Of course the mother of Eugène had to call on the General to express her thanks. She was a lady, a grande dame, a former vicomtesse, the widow of a president of the Constitutional Convention, of a general-in-chief of the Army of the Rhine. All this meant much to Bonaparte. The title, the social position, the noble air with which she expressed her gratitude. For the first time this young Corsican found himself in the presence of a real lady of high society. Joséphine, with her worldly experience, at once perceives what an impression she has made. She invites Napoleon to call some evening when he has nothing better to do. The next evening he rings at the porte cochère of the hotel in the Rue Chantraine, soon to be named in his honor, Rue de la Victoire. The door is opened by the concierge, and the General passes through the long corridor, traverses the small garden, and enters the house, where he is conducted to the little salon which is also the dining room. The room is furnished only with a round mahogany table, and 4 chairs covered with black horsehair. On the walls are hung a few prints framed in dark wood. While he is waiting for the mistress of the mansion to appear, let us briefly review the past history of Joséphine, of which he knows nothing. In 1726 there landed at Martinique a French nobleman, Gaspard Joseph Taché de la Pagerie, who, like many others, came to seek his fortune. There, in 1734, he married a young woman of noble family, by whom he had 5 children, 2 sons and 3 daughters. In 1756 the King had need in the Antilles of a man of energy, and the 1st of November he named to the place of Governor and Lieutenant General of Martinique and the other islands, François de Beauharnais, who was not created a Marquis until 8 years later. Except for the fact that both families originally came from the same locality in France, near Blois, there was little in common between this grand seigneur who arrived as master in the lands of his government, wealthy with his income of 150,000 livres, and these Tachés who were living in want in a corner of the island, without position, without fortune, buried in debt. A little later, the eldest daughter of Gaspard Joseph entered the household of the governor as an upper servant, or demoiselle de compagnie. In a very short time she had gained a dominant position in the family, which was not lessened by her marriage later with a Monsieur Renaudin. In 1761 the elder son of the original Taché, named Joseph Gaspard, born in 1735, married Rose Claire des Vergers de Saunois, of a family belonging to the ancienne noblesse of Brie. From this marriage there was born on the 23rd of June, 1763, a daughter who was named Marie Joseph Rose. This was Joséphine. Like her future husband, Napoleon, she had a narrow escape from not being born under the French flag. Only 10 days before her birth the island of Martinique had been returned to France by England in accordance with the terms of the Treaty of Paris, which ended the 7 Years' War. Until the age of 10 years, Joséphine grew up in full liberty. Then she was sent to the pension of the Dame de la Providence at Fort Royal, where she remained over 4 years. When François de Beauharnais landed as governor on the island of Martinique in May, 1757, he was accompanied by his young wife, whom he had married 6 years before. She was his cousin, and had brought him a large fortune. They had had 2 children, of whom only one was then living, François, born in the preceding year. On the 28th of May, 1760, another son was born on the island, who received the name of Alexandre. When his father and mother returned to France in the month of April of the following year, he was left in the care of Madame Taché. Here he remained for several years, and it was not until after the death of his mother that his father had brought him to France, about the end of the year 1769. With his brother he was sent to the University of Heidelberg, where he remained 2 years. In 1774, his brother having entered the army, his tutor, Patricole, was engaged by the Duc de la Rochefoucauld as teacher for the 2 sons of his sister, Rohan Chabot, and he took Alexandre with him. Thus it happened that the most impressionable years of his youth were passed at Roche Guyon, in a ducal château. During these years Madame Renaudin, who was his godmother, never lost sight of him. At the age of 17, Alexandre obtained, by the favor of the Duc de la Rochefoucauld, an appointment as sous-lieutenant in his regiment of the Sarre Infanterie. On entering the army he abandoned the title of chevalier, given at that time to the younger sons of noble families, and assumed that of vicomte, to which he had no valid claim. At this time Madame Renaudin formed a plan for his marriage with her niece Joséphine. The Marquis did not demand that Monsieur de la Pagerie should furnish a dot, as Alexandre already had an income of 40,000 livres from the estate of his mother, with the expectation of 25,000 more. In October, 1779, Madame Renaudin received a letter from her brother saying that he had just arrived at Brest with Joséphine, after a terrible passage. She at once set out with Alexandre to join them. This was the first interview between Joséphine and her future husband since their childhood days, and he was far from enthusiastic over her appearance. The party traveled slowly to Paris, where they arrived the middle of November. The marriage was celebrated on the 13th of December in the church at Noisy-le-Grand, where Madame Renaudin had a house. This residence, for which she had paid 33,000 livres 3 years before, she gave to her niece as a wedding present, besides the sum of 20,000 livres which she had spent for her trousseau. Immediately after the marriage, the young couple went to live in the Paris hotel of the Marquis, Rue Thévenot. In the spring Alexandre rejoined his regiment at Brest, leaving Joséphine alone in Paris, where she had no acquaintances. When his regiment was ordered to Verdun, Alexandre returned to Paris, where he lived like a bachelor, making no effort to introduce his wife to society. In fact, Joséphine was never presented at court. Her husband seems to have been ashamed of her. He found her awkward, embarrassed, ignorant. Worse than that, he thought she was homely and provincial, with foolish ideas of conjugal love, tenderness, and jealousy. He had married to be free to enjoy his fortune, and he had no idea of being tied down by his wife. On the 3rd of September, 1781, in the Rue Thévenot, was born a son who was named Eugène, and on the 10th of April, 1783, a daughter who was baptized the following day and received the name of Hortense Eugénie. The previous September, Alexandre had sailed for Martinique as aide de camp of M. de Bouillé. During the 4 years and over of his married life he had not spent 10 months with his wife. On receipt of the news of the birth of Hortense, he wrote a furious letter to Joséphine, in which he refused to accept any responsibility for the paternity of the child. On his return to France in October, 1784, he declined to meet his wife. After a number of vain efforts to arrive at a reconciliation, in the month of November Joséphine retired with Madame Renaudin to the Abbaye de Pantemont, Rue de Grenelle. Masson is of the opinion that Alexandre had no reason to reproach Joséphine for any acts subsequent to their marriage, and that his imputation upon the subject of the birth of Hortense had no foundation in fact. This opinion seems to be borne out by the terms of the formal act of separation which was signed in March, 1785. He agreed to give his wife an allowance of 5,000 livres a year, to leave Hortense with her mother, and also Eugène until he was 5 years old, and to pay for the education of his daughter. The sojourn of Josephine at Pantemont was of great advantage to her in every way. The Abbaye was like an immense furnished hotel, of the highest respectability, open only to women of la première distinction; and there Josephine for the first time had an opportunity of meeting women of her own social rank. She was received as the Vicomtesse de Beauharnais, an unfortunate, irreproachable young woman, the victim of a barbarous husband. For a woman of the world, Josephine already possessed two of the essential requisites. She was a coquette, and she knew how to lie. Without admitting the justice of the accusation of her husband, in these two respects he undoubtedly had a serious grievance against her. And to these two qualities Josephine adds, by the faculty of assimilation which is in her, that physical education which in a new society is to put her in a class by herself. Little by little a transformation is effected in her personality, which changes the heavy and awkward Creole into a being delicate and souple, a being desirable above all, who knows how to attract and to hold. It is thus that at Pantemont that Josephine forms her first relations with society, that she makes her début in French life. From every point of view this retreat of 15 months was profitable to her. On leaving Pantemont early in 1786, Josephine, at 23 years of age, found herself free, with an income of 11,000 livres for the support of her daughter and herself. At this time she sold the house at Noisy, and with the proceeds she bought at Fontainebleau a little house entre cour et jardin, where she established herself with her aunt. Here she lived until June, 1788, when she suddenly left for Martinique. None of her biographers has ever been able to find a reason for this departure. At the beginning of November, 1790, she returned as unexpectedly as she had left, and went to the Hôtel des Asturies, Rue d'Anjou. At this time she seems to have made another attempt at reconciliation with her husband, but without success. The Marquis and Madame Renaudin being still at Fontainebleau, Josephine passed the summer of 1791 there with her children, and it was there that she learned of the election of her husband as President of the Constitutional Convention. It was the 18th of June, and 3 days later the President in opening the session announced the flight of the royal family the previous night. During the 2 following weeks Alexandre de Beauharnais was virtually Dictator of France. In 1792 he served with distinction with the Army of the North, and early in the following year was put in command of the Army of the Rhine. A few months later he was removed on the ground of lack of force and energy. In the meantime Josephine was living in her apartment in Paris, Rue Saint Dominique, except when visiting her aunt at Fontainebleau. In March, 1794, Alexandre, who had been living in retirement in the country, was arrested and taken to the Carme, where he was imprisoned on the 14th. 5 weeks later Josephine was confined in the same prison. The old convent of the Church of Saint Joseph des Carmes is still standing in the Rue Vaugirard, between the Luxembourg and the Théâtre de l'Odéon. On the 23rd of July Alexandre was guillotined. 4 days later, 9 Thermidor, the fall of Robespierre ended the Reign of Terror. The life of Josephine was saved by this narrow margin of time. In 2 weeks she was released from prison. During the following year the fortunes of Josephine were at their lowest ebb. When she left the prison of the Carme, she found herself a widow of over 30 years, with 2 children, and without a sou. With the small remittances which she received from Martinique, with money which she borrowed on every side, with bills which she contracted everywhere, she somehow managed to exist. In August, 1795, when her affairs were still in this precarious condition, she leased from Julie Caraud, the wife of Talma, from whom she was separated, for a rent of 10,000 francs, in Assignat, a little hotel entre cour et jardin at No. 6, Rue Chantraine, a short street recently laid out from the Faubourg Montmartre to the Chaussée d'Antin. The street was lined with the residences of filles entretenues. As this little hotel was afterwards the residence of Napoleon, until he took possession of the Tuileries as First Consul in 1800, and was also occupied by Louis and Hortense the first year of their married life, it merits a few words of description. The entrance was by a porte cochère through a long corridor, at the end of which was a very small garden, with 2 small pavilions, which contained the carriage house and stable. In the middle was the little mansion, consisting only of a rez-de-chaussée, with an attic above and kitchen and cellar below. There were only 5 rooms: an antechamber, a bedroom, a salon, which also served as a dining room, another little salon which was used as a boudoir, and a garde robe. The servants' quarters were in the attic. Josephine had a carriage and 2 horses. In her service, besides the coachman, she had a chef and a femme de chambre. At this time Hortense was sent to the school which Madame Campan had just founded at St. Germain. It is not easy to understand, however, why she took Eugène away from General Hoche, who desired to keep him, and placed him in an expensive school just opened at St. Germain, under the name of the Collège Irlandais. Before taking possession of her new house, the 1st of October, 1795, Josephine had spent a very considerable sum in repairing and adding to the furniture in her apartment of the Rue St. Dominique. Nothing very luxurious, perhaps, but articles which had to be paid for. Who met the bills? Barras, in his Memoirs, does not hesitate to state most ungallantly that Josephine was his mistress. But Barras was a notorious liar, and he hated Napoleon, and could not say anything too mean about him. We will therefore give Josephine the benefit of the doubt. When Josephine first met Napoleon, in October, 1795, she was already 32 years of age. Her hair, which was not thick, but fine in quality, was of a dark chestnut color. Her complexion was brunette. Her skin was already wrinkled, but so covered with powder and rouge that the fact was not apparent under a subdued light. Her teeth were bad, but no one ever saw them. Her very small mouth was never more than slightly opened, in a sweet smile which accorded perfectly with the infinite softness of her eyes, with their long eyelashes, with the tender expression of her features, with the touching quality of her voice. "Et avec cela," writes one of her historians, "un petit nez fringant, léger, mobile, aux narines perpétuellement battantes, un nez un peu relevé du bout, engageant et fripon, qui provoque le désir." Her head, however, could not be mentioned in comparison with her body, so free and so svelte, which showed no signs of embonpoint, which ended in the most adorable little feet. She wore no corset, not even a brassière, pour soutenir la gorge d'ailleurs bas placée et plate. But her general demeanor was more important than all the rest. This woman has a way of carrying herself which belongs only to her. Elle a de la grâce même en se couchant. All her movements are so gracious and elegant that you forget that she is only of medium stature. With all these qualities, the femme seduced Napoleon at their first interview, while at the same time the dame impressed him by her air of dignity, as he put it, ce maintien calme et noble de l'ancienne société française. The first call was quickly followed by another, and soon Napoleon was a daily visitor at the little hôtel. There he met many grands seigneurs, such as Ségur, Montesquieu, and Caulaincourt, who treated him petit noble, as an equal, almost as a comrade. He was not enough of a man of the world to appreciate the fact that they came en garçon, that they did not bring their wives. The siege was not long. 2 weeks after the first visit, Napoleon and Josephine were already on more than intimate terms. On the 28th of October she wrote him: "Vous ne venez plus voir une amie qui vous aime? Vous l'avez tout à fait délaissée. Vous avez bien tort, car elle vous est tendrement attachée. Venez demain déjeuner avec moi. J'ai besoin de vous voir et de causer avec vous sur vos intérêts. Bonsoir, mon ami. Je vous embrasse. Veuve Beauharnais." From this time on Napoleon follows Josephine everywhere. He makes the acquaintance of Madame Tallien. As soon as Barras is installed in the Luxembourg in November, he attends the first reception of the new director. In the meantime events have moved fast. He writes her: "I awake full of thoughts of thee. Sweet and incomparable Josephine, what a strange effect you have on my heart. I draw from your lips, from your heart, a scorching flame. In 3 hours I shall see thee. In the meantime, my dear love, meo dolce amor, 1,000 kisses, but do not give me any, for they set my blood on fire." In January, 1796, the anniversary of the execution of the "last King of France," Barras gives a grand dinner. There are ladies present: Madame de Beauharnais, Madame Tallien, Madame de Carvoisin. Bonaparte is a guest, and is full of life and gaiety, and seems to greatly please the ladies. Poor little Hortense, whom they had taken from school for this occasion, was present at the dinner, and seems to have been jealous of the attentions to her mother of the little General, whose name she did not even know. She said, "Il parlait avec feu et paraissait uniquement occupé de ma mère." It is impossible to say at exactly what date Napoleon conceived the idea of transforming en mariage cette bonne fortune. For her part, Josephine took time to make up her mind. In a letter to a friend, she admits that she does not really love Napoleon, but that she does not feel any aversion toward him. Her feeling is rather that of indifference. "I admire the General's courage," she continues. "The extent of his knowledge upon all sorts of topics, upon all of which he talks equally well, the vivacity of his mind, which enables him to grasp the thoughts of others almost before they have been expressed, but I am frightened, I admit, at the control he tries to exercise over everything about him. His searching glance has something unusual and inexplicable in it, but which compels the respect even of our directors. Judge for yourself whether a woman has not good cause to feel intimidated by it. Finally, that which ought to please me, the force of his passion, which he expresses with an energy which leaves no room for doubt of his sincerity, is precisely that which makes me withhold the consent which I have often been ready to give. Can I, a woman whose youth is past, hope to hold for any length of time this violent affection which in the General resembles a fit of delirium? If, after our marriage, he should cease to love me, will he not reproach me with what he has done for me? Will he not regret having failed to make a more advantageous marriage? And what answer can I make then? What will there be for me to do? Tears will be my only resource." Josephine consulted all of her society friends. They told her that Bonaparte had genius and that he would go far; that Carnot made no secret of his intention to give him the command of an army. Still she hesitated. She was 32 years of age. She was faded. She was almost an old woman. She liked Napoleon, but she was not in love with him. In fact, she never really loved anybody but herself. But she was at the end of her resources, and marriage seemed to be the only way out of her troubles. She finally reached a decision the last of February. Nevertheless, she has precautions to take. First of all, to conceal her age, for she does not wish to admit to any one, least of all to this boy of 26, that she has passed the age of 32 years. From Calmelot, her man of confidence, she obtains a certificate that he is well acquainted with Marie Joseph Taché, veuve du citoyen Beauharnais, that she is a native of the island of Martinique, and that on account of the present occupation of the island by the English, it is impossible to procure her birth certificate. Armed with this notarial certificate, Josephine is able to declare that she was born 23rd of June, 1767, while she was really born 4 years earlier. The marriage contract was dated the 8th of March, 1796, and the marriage was celebrated the following day before a civil officer. Among the 4 witnesses were Barras and Tallien. No mention was made of the consent of the parents; they had not been consulted. 2 days later, General Bonaparte left alone to take command of the army of Italy. Heureusement on avait pris des avances sur la lune de miel. It is easier to imagine than to describe the fury of the Bonaparte family when they heard of the marriage of Napoleon. He had anticipated the storm, for he had not asked the consent of his mother. He had not written Joseph, and he had sent Lucien and Louis away from Paris. He had not asked the advice of any of his friends, and had invited none of them to the wedding. From the first day, even before they had met Josephine, the Bonaparte family declared a vendetta against the Beauharnais. From that moment, Napoleon lived in the midst of 2 hostile camps, always ready to break out into active hostilities. It may be interesting to read the opinion of some of her contemporaries regarding Josephine. To the captivating charm of her person all witnesses testify. Even Lucien, who was not particularly well disposed toward her, had to admit this. In his Mémoires he gives us the following picture: "Hardly to be noticed in the midst of this circle of pretty women, generally reputed to be of easy morals, is the widow of the Vicomte de Beauharnais. With little, very little wit, she had no trace of what could be called beauty, but there were certain Creole characteristics in the pliant undulations of her figure which was rather below the average height. Her face was without natural freshness, it is true, But the artifices of the toilette remedied this defect so as to make it appear fairly well by the light of the chandeliers. In short, her person was not entirely bereft of some of the attractions of her youth. Arnauld, in his Souvenir d'un Sexagénaire, does her better justice. He says: "The evenness of her disposition, her good nature, the amiability that shone in her eye, and which expressed itself not only in her words but in the tones of her voice, a certain indolence peculiar to Creoles which was recognizable in her carriage and movements even when she was making an effort to please, all these lent to her a charm which transcended the dazzling beauty of her two rivals, Mesdames Récamier and Tallien." Madame de Remusat, who had known Josephine since 1793, gives perhaps the most accurate description of her friend in these words: "Without being precisely beautiful, her whole person was possessed of a peculiar charm. Her features were delicate and harmonious, her expression gentle, her tiny mouth dexterously concealed defective teeth. Her somewhat dark complexion was improved by her clever use of cosmetics. Her figure was perfect, every outline well rounded and graceful, every motion was easy and elegant. Her taste in dress was excellent, and whatever she wore seemed to have its beauty enhanced. With these advantages and her constant care for her appearance, she succeeded in being never outshone by the beauty and youth of so many women around her. She was not a person of especial wit. A Creole and coquette, her education had been rather neglected. But she knew wherein she was wanting, and never betrayed her ignorance. Naturally tactful, she found it easy to say agreeable things. Very different was the impression which she produced upon Napoleon. "I was not insensible to the charms of women," he said later at St. Helena, "but my disposition made me timid in their company. Madame de Beauharnais was the first to reassure me. She said some flattering things to me about my military talents. That praise intoxicated me. I addressed myself continually to her. I followed her everywhere. I was passionately in love with her, and my infatuation was generally known among our acquaintances long before I ventured to declare myself to her. When this rumor became general, Barras spoke to me about it. I had no reason for denying it. 'If that is the case,' he said to me, 'you ought to marry Madame de Beauharnais. You have rank and talents to be turned to good account, but you stand alone, without fortune and without connections. You must marry. That will give you position.'" This advice of Barras accorded so well with Napoleon's inclinations that he made no further attempt to suppress his passion. He felt that this union with a lady of rank, a friend of the influential director, would strengthen his social position and further his ambition. Napoleon was never a man to let his heart run away with his head. In this case, love and ambition were in perfect accord. End of Chapter 5.